So that's the side seam now sewn up on both sides. Next I'm going to be putting on some bias binding onto the bottom edge. Okay, so making sure that the seam's open there at the underarm. I've just put a pin higher up just to help keep it flat there. And I'm going to put some bias binding around the bottom. Okay, so the way we sew the bias on is to line up the bottom edge with the bottom edge of the sleeve, and I've just opened this up because obviously bias comes like this, so open it up and you'll see that crease line. So I said make sure these seams here are open and flat, and the way we're going to do it is to overlap this by a couple of centimetres. So there's your seam, and just want this extra here. I've probably actually got about 3 centimetres there, but and then just put a pin there to hold it, and then we'll carry on opening this out and lining that up with the edge of the white stuff all the way around. White, I should say the edge of sleeve, sorry, not white stuff. And then at times some of these pink strips will slightly, I've tried to trim it down as best I can to match the edge there, but they might just be slight places where they're just over a little bit, but try and line it up with the edge of the white sleeve. And put your pins this way, not that way, because you're going to be putting this under the arm on the machine. So I'm just going to carry on a moment until I get around to the other side. Okay, so I'm nearly back round at the beginning. And what you want to do is the same again. You want to find the seam, and go a bit further than you need to by a couple of centimetres again. And then just cut it there. Right, so go back to this first one where we started, line that up, make with the seam of the underarm there, and put a mark. Then move that out the way and line this one up, again making sure that your seam is flat. And got your seam there, line that up, put a mark, like so. Okay, so now what I can do is take a couple of the pins out and then line that mark up with that mark as best you can. I think that's about right, that's it. And then holding them together, a couple of pins to hold it in place. And then what you'll be doing is running that under the machine and running a sewing line there and joining those two pieces together. Okay, you can now see that I've sewn that seam together. The next thing I'm going to do is just cut off the excess there. So get rid of that. And now that should line up with the seam on the sleeve. So just carry on, repin it around like you were doing, again make sure those seam flaps there are flat, and the same on top, flatten those down as well. Just going to go from the other side. There we go. And what we'll do now is, starting from the underarm seam, you'll be running a sewing line all the way around the bottom where the crease is until you get back round to the other side. I've now sewn on my bias binding all the way around the sleeve along that crease line I mentioned. So we're back to the beginning, again making sure your seams are open flat there and those are flat on the back. The next thing we're going to do is turn this bias over and turn it into the inside. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, I want to turn the bias to the inside, so fold that down and fold that in, and make sure you tuck these flaps in as well. I might sort that out in a minute actually. I'll just show you this for now, the principle of it, and then I'll sort that out. Be careful when you turn it to the inside that you don't roll it too far forward or you'll see the edge of the pink. You want to roll that back with your thumbs so that you just see the white edge. So again, make sure that your seams are flat, and then just going to take a pin and put that in place, and I'll just do the same on the other side there. So that's my starting point, and then I'll just carry on doing that all the way around, pulling that bias to the inside and making sure that this is all flat and that the pink bias doesn't roll forward and I just see the edge, and just carry on pinning that in place all the way around. Okay, I've already started, but basically I'm hand tacking the bias to the white sleeve. Now, because the sleeve isn't lined itself, you have to be very careful that you don't go through, so you're going right through to the other side like that, because then you'll see your stitches. So doing this very slowly, try and hold everything flat. You're just picking up a tiny little bit of the fabric, the white fabric, sorry, and a little bit of the liner, like so, and doing smallish stitches. So then just pick up a tiny bit and then a bit of the bias on the edge and pull it through like that. And I'm doing that all the way around, saying being careful not to go right the way through to the other side. So I don't want to see any, although this is white thread, I don't want to see any stitches from the other side. Okay, so this is now the bias is turned to the inside of the sleeve. Right, the moment has arrived to actually put the sleeve into the armhole. So you can see we've got the inside of the bodice here, and that shows the inside of the sleeve. And then the outside should be on the outside. And starting at the bottom, where you've got your underarm seam, you want to make sure that all your seam flaps are open and flat, and make sure all the other seams as well, all the way around, are flat as well, and that make sure that the seam underneath the for the sleeve is flat on that side as well for your underarm. And then we've just carried on pinning the edge to edge all the way around the sleeve like so. The next thing we're going to do is just run a light tacking stitch in place all the way around to hold all those layers together before we sew it on the machine in place. Okay, so we've actually taken the end of the sewing machine here, so we just have the little bit here sticking out, so we can actually get the armhole around the machine. This will make it easier, and then we'll just start sewing our seam allowance all the way around to actually sew the sleeve in properly. Now we've actually sewn the sleeve in, I'm just going to use this unpicker and unpick some of the stitching, tacking stitches that I put in earlier to hold the sleeve to the armhole before we sewed it in, and then we'll go on to the next bit. Okay, what we want to do now is just do some snips around the curve just to help it lie flat. And again, be careful not to cut through your stitching line where you've just sewn your sleeve in. You're just cutting just a few millimeters before you hit your sewing line. Now the sleeves are in, the next thing I want to do is add some more of this diamante chain that I put on the bodice here and on the swags on the skirt. Doing it the same way using this E6000 glue and a pasty stick. It's actually a cocktail stick, but there you go. So I'm just gluing that on, and the next thing I'm going to do is put a heavy weight on that. It's going to take a bit of time doing. I've got to do these one at a time, and the reason why I didn't put this on earlier is because of sewing that into machine and risk it getting caught or hitting the arm on the machine or the foot, and I thought I didn't want to take that risk, so I'm gluing this on after. I've now finished gluing on my diamante chain onto the strips on the sleeve on both sides. So that now completes and finishes sleeves on the bodice. Okay, so I'm just putting it on now just so you can have a look at the sleeves. Please ignore the t-shirt underneath, this won't be here eventually. Okay, so what I've decided, because we know in the film that she has these longer sleeves coming out, is I've decided to do a detachable sleeve option. So this is a practice run that I've done. It's going to be a lined sleeve. And what's going to happen is I've made an under chemise top because I don't actually have one to go with this costume anyway. This will go under the corset that I'm wearing, and then the idea is this is going to attach with some poppers or presters, whatever you want to call them, onto the straps, and it will just connect in 3 places and just be held there. So that'll go right underneath inside, which I can't quite do at the minute, but it's just to give you an idea. I'll show you in a moment how I'm going to make these. So that's the idea what I'm going to do with the sleeves. So if it is a colder day, I've got an option then to have a nice warm sleeve underneath. So this next bit is actually making the separate sleeves, and you can see here I've got one made up that you'll see in a second on this tutorial video. Unfortunately, this method didn't quite work out in the end, so you will see me making up the whole sleeve like a proper sleeve with a curved head. But what we will have to do, if you can carry on watching the tutorial video, is we'll have to chop the top off, or we're going to attach it to the ends of the little puff sleeves on the bodice. So yeah, it didn't quite work out, and the weight of this was just pulling on the straps of the chemise, and it was also quite in extra bulk around the arms, so it didn't quite work. So we'll go with the tutorial now. It will be exactly the same method, so the only difference is that you will see that this bit is missing later on, so don't be confused. It's the fact that it didn't work, so it will end up looking a little bit straighter along the edge there. Okay, so this next bit will tell you the method to do it. I say it's exactly the same, except you won't have a curved head instead. Okay, so I started with a conventional long sleeve pattern that I actually got from a dress pattern, and I used this sleeve from my Elsa top that has the point at the bottom, which I thought would be a good guide for me to go by, because we want the point that Ariel has at the bottom of the long sleeves. So I just got this out so I could use that as a guide. I didn't really need the rest of the sleeve because that's a raglan sleeve, which is totally different top. So I'll be using the same pink fabric as I did for the bodice, and I've extended it out a little bit wider because I wanted just a bit more room, and obviously shaped it to the point at the bottom here. I've now cut out my sleeve pattern out of the main fabric, and I've also got this pink cotton here to make a liner, so cut 2 of each one for both sleeves. Okay, so I've now cut out my long sleeve pattern out of the main fabric. I've also cut out the same pattern in a pink cotton for a liner, and cut out the same for the other sleeve, so 1 of each, 1 of outer fabric and 1 of liner. I've now overlocked the edges on the sleeve to make it nicer and last a bit longer. And now I'm going to put the two together. When you put the two together, make sure you've got the, because I want the matte side to show on the outside, I don't want the shiny side. Make sure you've got the shiny side, which I'll say is the bad side, right way up, and your good side right side down. The cotton doesn't matter so much because it's the same both sides. Okay, so the next thing to do is to run a sewing line across the top of the armhole, about usual seam allowance of 1.5 centimetres in from the edge. So from there all the way to there, and at the bottom here the same, from there down to the point, then back up to the other side, keeping that distance of 1.5 centimetres. The next thing to do is to clip some of the curves and the corners. I'm going to go in at an angle there, make like a triangle shape at the bottom, and then at the top just do a few snips, trying to not cut through the sewing line. Do not do that. This will just help it bend when you turn it the right way out. Okay, now we've clipped our corners, I'm just going to reach inside and turn this the right way out. And the next thing to do will be to very carefully iron this and iron it into that nice curved shape it is at the top there for the armhole. And the same here, you want a nice crisp straight edge with a point for the bottom of the sleeve.
To get a crisp edge on your turn seam, push up the seam from behind so you can see the stitching, and then squash that flat with your fingers, and then you can iron that. And as you go, I find it easier to just lick my finger and thumb and then roll the material so that you can see the stitching there as you go, and then you know you'll be ironing right on the edge.
Okay, now your sleeve is all pressed, you need to fold it in half so that your liner is showing upwards towards you, and then I'm going to start from the bottom because that's the part that's going to be seen. This is going to be up inside my armhole inside the other sleeve, so it won't be seen. So I'd rather, just in case it's out a little bit, I'd rather make sure these points match up here. So I'm going to sew up the side seam of the sleeve, the usual seam allowance of 1.5 centimetres in. Okay, so I've now sewn up the side seam, and the next thing to do is to reach inside and turn it the right way out. Okay, so I've now turned it the right way out and the seam is on the inside, and that's the main sleeve actually finished. Next will be, we're going to attach some poppers at the top on the liner to attach to the chemise little top that I made earlier, and then that will be those finished. Okay, so here we are doing that, what I said earlier, the thing that didn't work with the curved head. So we've got this mock-up practice run I did, we're using that as a template. We're going to cut it at least 2 centimetres high because I want to not overlock it like we've done here, but also turn a nice neat edge to the back. So what we're doing is just lining up, we've done a line and we're going to cut right across there. Okay, so these are now the revised sleeves finished. I've put the poppers on, and then over here I've got the corresponding poppers to that, so then that'll just pop onto there, onto each one on the inside. And then I've got the two options of having longer sleeves if it's a colder day, or shorter ones. So that now completes the whole thing finally after 1 year and 4 months, nearly. I'm just waiting on my wig and I'll do a quick show. Hello everyone! Well, finally, after 1 year and 4 months, I finally finished the dress that was a little bit of a disaster going back years and years and years now, that I've wanted to remake for quite some time, and it's finally finished. So I'll just do this little video for now. I'm still waiting on my wig, so when that comes through from the lady who's doing it for me, I will load that video properly and do a full preview of all the wig and the dress together. So for now it's just this until that arrives. So here it is, and yes, I added some twinkles to the petticoat. They are Swarovski crystals. I missed that out on the tutorial, but after I finished the dress I thought it's got to be done, it needs some sparkle there, so you'll notice that this has just been added recently. thing that we'll do is we can actually detach these sleeves from the poppers underneath. Okay, so detach the sleeve. So now I've got the option of just having it without the extra long sleeves in if I want to. So if it's a really hot day, but if it's really cold I can put those on and it'll just keep my arms a little bit warmer. I know in the film she has the long sleeves, but I just thought it'd be a much better option to have them detachable, and you can still see it's Ariel even without the long sleeves, so it's, you know, just an extra. Not to because I don't want to mess it up. Okay, so I've taken the other one off just for a quick view without the sleeves on. So, as I say, until the rig comes, this is it for now. So hopefully it won't be too many weeks to wait until the lady who's kindly doing that for me will finish it, and hopefully have that video loaded up soon.